Thanks for staying with us on the conversation. We switch gears to Nigeria, where during a virtual commissioning event, President Muhammadu Buhari defended his administration's heavy borrowing, stating it was a deliberate choice to fight poverty, promote economic growth, and create employment opportunities for Nigerians. While acknowledging concerns about the debt profile, Buhari emphasized that the borrowed funds were invested in transparently executed infrastructure projects that could be verified by the public. Under his leadership, Nigeria's infrastructure stock doubled from around 20% to over 40% of the GDP, with the commissioned bridges and other projects symbolizing the country's commitment to prosperity.
However, there are growing concerns over the significant increase in borrowing from China, which rose by 209.15% during Buhari's administration, resulting in a total bilateral loan increase of 219.91% from $1.58 billion in June 2015 to $5.07 billion in December 2022. Nigeria's overall debt stock was approaching 80 trillion naira as Buhari's tenure neared its end on May the 29th. Despite these concerns, President Buhari maintained that the borrowed funds were instrumental in driving economic growth and that the commissioned projects, along with previous developments in rail, sea and airports, were tangible evidence of Nigeria's focus on delivering prosperity and addressing poverty and inefficiencies in business and service delivery. Now, joining us on the conversation this evening, we have Basil Abia, a research associate at Quaco Research, joins us from the nation's capital, Abuja. We also have Mukhtar Mohammed, a financial analyst and CEO at Asia Dynamic Solutions, joins us from Lagos. So one welcome to you, gentlemen, and thanks for joining us on the conversation.
My pleasure.
Hi. Now, I'd like to start with Basil. Now, Basil, to what extent has the heavy borrowing that we've seen undertaken by the Buhari administration effectively addressed poverty and created economic growth in Nigeria? What specific evidence or indicators can you cite to support your assessment?
Thank you for the question. Actually, to the contrary, those borrowings have done little to nothing to address Nigeria's grave concerns with regards to poverty, or creating economic growth, further economic growth and mass prosperity, like President Muhammadu Buhari had pronounced or announced yesterday. I think, and not that I even think there's data to back my assertion, I disagree completely with the president of Nigeria when he says that, because the data is actually contrary to what he's saying or what he believes and what his supporters believe. First and foremost, poverty numbers. We all know that the poverty numbers for Nigeria as of 2015, according to MBS, was just roughly around 89.5 million Nigerians. That number has increased, of course, to over 133 million Nigerians. This data is sourced from the National Bureau of Statistics, their multi-dimensional poverty index that was released late last year. We all saw the numbers, 133 multi-dimensional poor Nigerians. So Nigerians are actually poorer than they were when President Muhammadu Buhari took over office in May 2015. And then if we look at economic growth, averagely, and these are numbers that we work with as researchers, especially as development researchers, Nigeria's growth rate between 2015 to 2020 was just around 2.1%. So if you do the average for all of those years, cumulatively, just 2.1%. So the growth was very slow. And then we all know, of course, that the pandemic did cause another recession after the 2016 recession. So we can cut his government some slack with the pandemic. But regardless, if you do the averaging for the entirety of his 8 years, we haven't broken up to 3% average in the last 8 years in growth. So growth has been very, very minimal. It has been painfully slow, which is unacceptable for the size of our economy, for the potential of our economy, of course, in that sense. So on that particular number, or that variable, he also did poorly, regardless of the extensive borrowings that he endorsed in. Now, the third one, mass prosperity, infrastructural development. Where? I mean, that's the question to ask. Where? We see with the numbers, we also see with anecdotes. That's what I do for a living as a researcher, combining empirical numbers, of course, with anecdotal data, and then applying context to provide that commentary. And we haven't seen mass prosperity anywhere. We haven't even seen the infrastructure that people talk about. Yes, I can say that the standard gauge rail infrastructure for Nigeria, we increased the length numbers by over 500 kilometers, but that's about it. 3,500.
That's the second Niger
was
bridge,
what we had of our rail infrastructure in
Lagos
2015.
Ibadan Express Road, and other road projects that were commissioned in the last few days. Don't they count as infrastructure projects?
They count, but they're like little drops of water in the ocean. And let me tell you why. World Bank already reports that only 30% of our road infrastructure is fully tarred. So regardless of those ramped up investments, they were not enough to pull those numbers up. Let me tell you why it's very important that we increase our road infrastructure quality. 90% of all of the traffic of our goods and of our people, they're still borne by our roads. And 70% of those volumes are carried by our federal roads or our federal highways. And our federal highways only take 17%. Now, these numbers are from the World Bank, but we corroborated them and then we presented them at a UNCTAD conference in Abuja late last year. And what our conference paper basically was saying was that it was minuscule. Those investments were minuscule. We still had to be very creative with our finances.
Yeah.
I will also put it out there. And I think STARS also corroborates my argument here. STARS data or STARS insights based in Lagos. The bulk of our borrowings, of course, the numbers, if you look at the Debt Management Office, the DMO, our domestic debt stock actually comprises a majority of our public debt stock, right? Now, those domestic debt stocks are actually bridge loans from the CPN, which we now refer to as Ways and Means Financing. And there was a securitization that the National Assembly, particularly the Senate, approved very early in May. That has increased. And the major reason why we're engaging in those ways and means, or his government were engaging in ways and means, was because we were always falling short of our expected revenues when we plotted out the budget, or when his government plotted out the budgets for 2016, 2017, 2018. So the budget deficits continued to widen, and they needed those bridge loans from the CPN. And those bridge loans are what they want to securitize into 40-year long bonds with a 9-year interest rate or coupon rate in that sense. So at the end of the day, his borrowings were not actually for infrastructural projects. Contrary to his claims yesterday, it wasn't for. It was actually for bridging our budget deficits.
Okay, so no infrastructural development, but rather bridging the budget deficit. So I'd like to bring it, just take a pause there, Basil. I'll come over to you later, but I want Mukhtar to also share his opinion on this, because the president now is saying that it was a deliberate choice to borrow, and it was to, deal with the poverty in the country and bring about economic growth. Basil is saying that no, it has totally been retrogressive and it's not necessarily to improve the economy. So first of all, Mukhtar, what your opinion on that? Do you feel that there has been nothing to show with the high level of borrowings from the Buhari administration? And second of all, what are the long-term implications of this deliberate choice that Buhari has done?
Thank you so much. I can't say that there's no deliberate. We can say the borrowing all itself was bad, because when you look at any nation, the first thing you have to develop is your critical infrastructure. The borrowing initially was tied to specific project, which I think was very nice for the Buhari administration when they started. At the point, I think they saw it as an easy means to meet up their electoral promises that they gave to Nigeria. So they saw it as an opportunity to keep borrowing just to build infrastructure. And at that time, they started borrowing excessively beyond what they can pay. Because the challenge is not about the borrowing, like my colleague said. It's about what are you borrowing for? What are you really borrowing for? And do you have the means to pay? At a point, it was borrowed through the GDP. That was all they tell us, our GDP is still nice. But later on, they stopped. They didn't tell us that it's not the GDP used to pay the debt. You use the revenue to pay the debt. So our challenges started when we were not able to pay debt. We were not getting enough revenue, so we have about 97% of our budget on servicing of debt. So that's where I think I started having a problem with the Buhari administration in the area of borrowing, because they saw it as an easy means out. We were proclaiming other solutions, maybe the PPP, and I think they weren't listening to that. They just wanted to borrow as much as they can. To say the effect in the near future, of course, we're already doing 97% in terms of payment and debt servicing out of our budget. So practically that means that we just have 3%. So it's a cycle that we'll keep doing because, again, we don't have the resources to meet up. And when we want to meet up, it's widening the tax bracket. And when they talk about widening the tax bracket, it's taxing the already taxed. So it's a cycle that I hope this incoming administration, it might be difficult for them to steer it immediately because they also want to impress Nigeria with their own electoral promises. But I think they should go a little bit different, maybe looking at PPP as a means of borrowing. Right? When I mean PPP as a means of borrowing, why should government be putting so much fund in a critical road like Lagos-Ibadan? Or if you give it to the private sector to build and operate, it will be able to take care of itself. Why should we be putting our money in the power sector when we can actually give it also to why is government still involved in railway? All developed nations all over the world, what they do is PPP. Why was government even still thinking of borrowing to have a national carrier also? And also, why was government thinking of also borrowing just to dash people money? That's what the way I see it. They want to give people money. You think that would be the solution to alleviating of poverty, rather than thinking of how you can make sure the productive sector is working. So my challenge is fine borrowing for key critical infrastructure. They pride themselves with that, but like you say, it's not the infrastructure that will put food on the table of Nigeria. It's what the infrastructure brings to the table, and as it stands now, those infrastructure are standalone. Because when you look at transportation has gone up. You look at insecurity, despite this infrastructure, they still have a lot of insecurity challenges. So for me, I think it's a cycle that we've entered. I just hope and believe that the incoming administration will find a solution to it.
Thank you, Mukhtar. Now, Basil, Mukhtar suggested more public and private sector partnerships rather than going borrowing. Because they say if you go borrowing too much, you might go sorry. Now, as President Buhari's tenure comes to an end in a few days' time, how critical is it for Nigerians to closely monitor and address the country's mounting debt profile? Because as we speak, there are talks of the government trying to borrow last-minute $800 million just to distribute money to Nigeria's most economically vulnerable people. So what specific concerns or challenges does this pose for Nigeria's future economic prospects?
Yeah, thank you very much. From my own end, I think it's very important that Nigerians take this seriously. And the reason is our debt burden is increasing. It's almost going to, at the rate at which we're going, there's a chance we're going to get the Ghanaian treatment, which is a haircut. Basically, some parts of our debt obligations we will not be able to meet, and that will cause, of course, serious economic downturn. So one way Nigerians can actually ensure that we take a closer look at how we manage our debt is to put pressure, an incredible amounts of pressure on our senators and our House of Reps. There are certain oversight functions that those two houses, that Nigerian bicameral house, can handle and put the federal government under immense pressure to say that certain loans shouldn't be taken in the context of whatever projects that they want to fund those loans for. And then also that the CBN Act is adhered to. We all know about securitization, and we also know about the ways and means, the legislation behind how ways and means financing from CBN is carried out. It's not supposed to be 5% of our revenue from the past budget year, and then it's supposed to be paid in 1 year. And we have not seen that happen since 2015. So those burdens are really putting us in a serious economic precarious situation. So I know a lot of Nigerians feel deflated to always engage with their National Assembly members, but that's the pipeline. That's really the pipeline. For me personally, I'm going to put pressure on my senator, the incoming senator for Abuja, for the FCT, to ensure that she tries to, in our own little part, together with a coalition of opposition senators, ensure that the CBN Act is adhered to, especially with regards to ways and means financing, and also see that the DMO handles our debt in a more transparent manner. I think that we're having serious issues with transparency on how our debt is managed, and we need to be able to ramp that up, because I do not think we have the burden, we have the buffer to manage a haircut, not to even talk of a debt default in the next 2-3 years. Our Ghanaian brothers, if you make some calls with your friends across the borders to Ghana, they will tell you how hellish it is. And I would not pray for that to be the situation in Nigeria. So increased pressure on our representatives in the National Assembly, and then, of course, more pressure on the DMO with regards to transparency. And hopefully that enables us to manage the tide.
Okay, thank you so much, Basil. Talking about transparency, more pressure on the bicameral legislature. Now, Mukhtar, for you, I mean, what are the other challenges you feel that this incoming administration is bound to face? We're having a high debt profile. What are plausible alternatives? You talked about the public and private partnership. What are the alternatives? Because it seems when any administration comes, the next thing they go to is let's borrow to try and have this budget deficit and deal with the economic situations in the country. So what alternatives do you think are available for the incoming administration?
I think they have, number one, I think first and foremost, the incoming administration will battle with acceptability by Nigerians. If you look at how the election planned out, and I think that could work to the advantage of Nigeria. They might listen to us and begin to do some of those things that we've always said they should do. Number one, when you talk about what should they do differently, I think first and foremost, they should look at the expenditure. In terms of when you look at expenditure, you begin to look at your revenue by your expenditure. And most of these expenditures, especially in terms of salary allowance, are mostly of political appointee. Why do we have two senior special assistants to the president on media? We have special assistants, senior special assistants. That is a cost. So why can't we begin to think how we reduce that? That reducing the cost of governance. I think that's one thing I think they should do first, that we reduce overhead costs. We free up a lot of funds for other projects. And secondly, when we talk about widening the tax bracket, they should also look at tax as a way of attracting investment into Nigeria, just not only looking at tax as a revenue, but they should look at tax as a means of growing the economy also. Or how do you attract the big company? How do you give them tax bracket? It's a win-win situation when you give them tax bracket, because when they come here, they employ Nigerians. Those Nigerians will pay tax. Why they enjoy the tax holiday for some time before they start paying? So why can't we begin to look at that we increase our revenue? Also, then why not we also begin to look at how can we get the informal sector to begin to pay tax? I think that would be the game changer, because when you look at those that pay tax in Nigeria, they are mostly the formal sector. How do you get that woman that is on the street paying tax? How do you get the barber or the hairdresser begin to pay tax? What incentive will you want to bring to them so that they will begin to pay tax? If you do that, the informal sector is the largest employer of labor in Nigeria. They employ over 80% of Nigeria. So if you are able to do that, then you are creating more revenue for yourself. And then again, they have to deal with the monster cost for a subsidy. If they can just handle these four basic things outside, but you mustn't forget, first of all, they have to deal with the insecurity, especially when it comes to food security. That also is a big issue that they need to deal with. If they're able to do that, I think we might begin to smile.
Thank you very much, Mukhtar. I'm afraid we've come to the end of this conversation, and we hope the incoming administration takes some of the tips that our distinguished panelists have shared this evening, because Nigeria, like Basil said, you wouldn't want a haircut like our Ghanaian brothers.
I mean, Benga, imagine you having that difficulty. Nice. No, I know you want to bring it to me. You're the one having a haircut. But thank you so much, Basil, and thank you, Mukhtar. We definitely hope for the best in this incoming administration. This is where we'll call it a wrap on today's edition of The Conversation. I am Rita Omodia.
And I'm Benga.